Hello, my friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Voices in the Game. I'm Colton the Bias. So, Voices in the Game is going to be a summer interview series that we are going to be doing over the course of the next few months to give you an inside look, as we're going to go beyond the box score and give you an inside look of what it is like to work in the sports industry and to showcase so many incredible people who bring the sports industry to life for all of you who might have an interest in joining us in the sports world. And I am pleased to be joined by our very first guest of Voices in the Game. He is a true veteran on the mic, and he has spent the last 25 years as the voice of the Bucknell Bison. He is Mr. Doug Birdsong. Doug, thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I am so thrilled and honored that you are our first guest of Voices in the Game.
Well, I appreciate it, Colton. I mean, you have been able to work with us for over a year now, and certainly have enjoyed being able to kind of help, hopefully mentor you, but definitely having you aboard.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Doug. So let's get started, Doug. So can you take us back, to the beginning as a boy growing up in Huntington, West Virginia? What drew you to wanting to be a sportscaster? And was there really any particular sporting event that first drew you to say, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Well, oddly enough, I think when I was very young, I remember listening to some disc jockeys on the radio, and we used to have at that time a reel-to-reel tape machine. That's going back a few years, Colton, but reel-to-reel tape machine. I remember I would record my voice and stuff on that, but I didn't necessarily want to go into broadcasting with any kind of degree. But about halfway through my senior year in high school, my plan really from at least my junior year, maybe even halfway through my sophomore year of high school, my plan was to go on to major in art at either a university or art school. And because I was very interested in drawing and so forth. But about halfway through my senior year of high school at Huntington East High School in Huntington, West Virginia, I remember listening to a game, a Marshall at a Mississippi State football game on the radio, and the individual who was calling it, guy by the name of Frank Gardenia, I just thought it was so neat to hear him. And I was playing high school football at the time at Huntington East. And so I had kind of an affinity for football for sure, but other sports as well. And that kind of got me introduced to it. And I thought that would be a really neat job. And so from that point on, halfway through my senior year in high school, I scrapped the plans of being able to go into art and maybe even majoring in art in a college setting or whatever, and ended up going to college to ultimately graduate with a degree in communications. And that right there kind of launched my interest in trying to become a sports broadcaster.
And how was it like for you, Doug, breaking into the industry after you walked across your stage and received your diploma from Marshall?
It's not an, as you well know, Colton. I mean, whether it's now in 2025 or back in 1987 when I graduated from Marshall University in Huntington, it's not an easy proposition. I remember sending out at that time, we used cassette tapes, but I remember sending out a ton of cassette tapes, ton of resumes, just kind of cold calling, sending them out to a bunch of different places, really West Virginia, some in West Virginia, a lot in Tennessee, a bunch in Kentucky as well, and just didn't really get any kind of response. And I'm sure you've kind of been through that too. It gets a little bit discouraging, but about, I'm going to say a month, maybe a month and a half after I graduated, there was an individual at WTCR, which actually was the number one rated radio station in the Huntington market. And the Huntington market was pretty good sized at the time. And they had asked if I would like to be the sports director. It would just be a part-time gig. I would only be doing sportscasts in the morning and so forth, Monday through Friday. And then on Saturdays would help out some. But I said, sure. And after about a month doing that, it ended up that one of the news anchors left at WTCR, and they said, would you like to go into news as well as sports? It would be a full-time job. And I said, sure. So at that point, I anchored the morning news. We had someone who anchored the afternoon and someone who anchored the evening. And that's kind of how I got started. Now, during that time, once it was actually probably my junior year of college at Marshall, all the way through my senior year, and then going into my time at WTCR, I called high school games for a station down in not quite southern West Virginia, but it was off US Route 23 in a place called Fort Gay. I kid you not, Fort Gay, West Virginia. And it is WFGH. It was a high school station, and they carried Fort Gay high school games, but they also carried another high school in that county, Crum High School, another one up in further up in that county, Vinson High School. And so we called high school football games. I actually was the analyst for the first year, my junior year of college, with a great friend of mine, Randy Lee, who has been a long time an announcer. And for the past 15 or 16 years, has been the play-by-play announcer for Western Kentucky University. So he was doing the play-by-play. I was doing the analyst role. Then my senior year in college, I moved over to the play-by-play because he graduated, and had another individual who also had graduated the same time Randy did, and he was my analyst, and did that for the next 3 years, basically 3.5 years, before moving on, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's kind of how I got things started.
That's awesome, Doug. And Doug, for any of our viewers, who might not have ever heard of a cassette tape before or don't even know what that is, can you take us through the process of how that was like, to make a cassette tape, and send them out, because it's just a technology, that obviously my generation, has never had to use, for us as broadcasters, it's just we download our videos and then we just get them ready on like Adobe Premiere Pro and edit them. So can you take us through what that was like for you, to make a cassette tape and then sending them out, or around where you grew up in Huntington?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go through it, Colton. And it is, I mean, nowadays, as you said, digital, and you have different programs. If it's video, maybe Adobe or Final Cut, Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro. But back then, we'd use those reel-to-reel tapes. We recorded everything on a reel-to-reel tape, and I would get dubs of that. I would dub it onto another reel-to-reel tape, and I would literally splice. We would have a splicing board. The audio tape was about not quite a quarter-inch wide, and you had a metal splicing board. It fit into that area, and there were areas where you could literally use a razor like you would use razor blade to shave, and you would cut the tape. So you would get highlights from whatever game or games you wanted to put on there. You would cut it, splice it together, and then you could go from that using the audio board at WMUL-FM. That was the college radio station at Marshall University. You would be able to go from that 8-inch reel-to-reel tape to a cassette tape, because we had cassette recorders where you could record onto a cassette. And then that was much easier to send out via the U.S. Post Office at that time. There was no FedEx, no maybe UPS, but basically everybody used the U.S. Post Office and just send those out. And that's kind of how things were done. It was more of a physical, in some ways, more of a physical action than what it is now. Obviously, with the digital aspect, that's physical too. But that was kind of how things were done back in the old days.
That is amazing, Doug. And then moving forward, with your career, and then you made the jump to New Concord, Ohio to be the sports director at AVC Communications. So can you take us through, the main highlights on what it was like for you in that decade you were in New Concord? And what were some of the biggest lessons that you learned during your time there?
Well, of course, I was at WTCR 2.5 years, and I remember there was a magazine. I'm not even sure if it still exists. It may in some capacity, called Broadcast Magazine. And in the back, there would be advertisements. So radio stations around the country would advertise if they needed news, sports, sales, whatever. And I remember I would look at that because WTCR would always have a copy there. And I remember seeing that there was a need actually, it's Cambridge, Ohio, which is right next door to New Concord. But we'll get to that in a sec. But they had a need at a group of radio stations under the umbrella of AVC. It was Audio Visual Creations, AVC Communications. They had like 4 radio stations, and they were looking for a news director, but also sports. And obviously, my time at WTCR, I was doing both the news, sports director. I wasn't calling play-by-play because WTCR was just really music centered, but we did have news and sports casts, of course. But I did some of that with the high school football and WFGH. And so I applied for it, was able to get it, moved up there in July of 1989. Cambridge, Ohio is about an hour 15 to the east of Columbus, right off Interstate 77. As a matter of fact, they call it East Central Ohio, the eastern side of Ohio. It's right where the intersections of Interstate 70 and 77 meet. But one of the high schools that we covered was in New Concord, John Glenn High School, named after the former astronaut and senator from Ohio, U.S. Senator John Glenn. We covered Cambridge High School. We covered Meadowbrook High School, which was about 8 miles south of Cambridge in a place called Bison. We covered Buckeye Trail High School, which was in a place called Old Washington, which was just to the east of Cambridge. And then we also, when I first started there, they had just opened another station down in Caldwell. Caldwell's about 25 minutes to the south off Interstate 77, south of Cambridge. And there were two high schools there, Caldwell High School and Shenandoah High School. So I was able to call high school football, basketball, boys basketball, girls basketball, baseball, volleyball. They didn't really have soccer programs, but those sports, some softball as well, but I was able to call those sports for AVC Communications.
Oh, that's awesome, Doug. So did you stick to just one high school when you were there? Or, since you mentioned there were so many towns, did you bounce around from like one high school or another? So how did that work for you?
My first couple of years, I pretty much we would put up the schedule and we would try and cover all of them. Now, the majority of the games would be Cambridge High School. That's where the majority of the advertisers were located. And we kind of split between Cambridge and Meadowbrook because Byesville also had some of the sponsors. Unfortunately, Old Washington, Buckeye Trail High School didn't have a lot, but we would carry a few of those games. New Concord had a few, so we carried a few John Glenn. My first couple of years, I did call Shenandoah and Caldwell games, but then we ended up getting a group, two guys who did a great job calling those Caldwell games, and they called Shenandoah games. So they kind of did, that's Noble County, Ohio, Cambridge, Buckeye Trail, Byesville, Meadowbrook High School. They were all in Guernsey County, and then John Glenn was in Muskingum County. And so I called John Glenn games, but then we got a person who kind of handled the John Glenn games. We had those two individuals who handled the Caldwell Shenandoah games. So then primarily I would call Cambridge, Meadowbrook, and Buckeye Trail games. And then later, probably about 5 years into my time with AVC, they ended up acquiring another signal. There was not another radio station at the time, but they got a signal from the FCC and they opened up another station, WB&V, out of Barnesville, which is even further east. It's not too far from the Pennsylvania line, the western part of PA, and it's right off Interstate 70, coming close to St. Clairsville, Ohio, Wheeling, West Virginia, that area and stuff, not too far from Pittsburgh, but Barnesville. I did some of their games. Then we got an individual who handled the Barnesville game. So at that time, it was primarily Cambridge, Meadowbrook, and Buckeye Trail in
What were
terms of high schools.
Okay. Oh yeah, and then so what were the biggest lessons that you learned, Doug? From your time at AVC. Oh, and also, how was it like for you also getting the chance to call college sports as well with Muskingum, if I'm pronouncing that right?
Yes. So probably about 5 years into my tenure, maybe four, we started to actually work on a package with our one AM station, WILE AM. We were able to work on a package where we sold some Muskingum games. It was just home games, so didn't get to do the road games. Actually, WMCO, the college station at Muskingum, they were the ones who handled usually home and away. So they would broadcast, the students would broadcast the home games. We would too for football, just select. We did almost every home football game and then select men's basketball games, select women's basketball games, actually called the 1992, I guess it was 92, NCAA Division III Final Four up in the Minneapolis, St. Paul. It was actually a St. Paul University, but Muskingum made it to the Final Four of the women's basketball, NCAA Division III women's basketball, so called that the semifinal and championship. But it was great. It was great being able to call college because my goal when I was going to Marshall was to be the voice of a college, to be able to be the announcer, the main play-by-play announcer for a college or university. And what my aim was is to be able to travel with the team and be a part of the team. Obviously, that wasn't happening with Muskingum, but still, it was just an opportunity be able to get some college audio onto my cassette tape for my resume building, and I loved it. I mean, the folks at Muskingum were great. It was fun being able to do some games on Saturdays because typically the high school games would be Friday nights. May have a few basketball games on Saturday for the most part. Things were on Friday nights, and so Saturdays for home Muskingum football games, for instance, we would do those and able to call a couple of NCAA tournament men's basketball games, some NCAA softball, some volleyball as well. So I was able to just broaden the horizon from the college perspective. And Muskingum is a member of the Ohio Athletic Conference. And about the time that we really started carrying some Muskingum games was when Mount Union, which has been a powerhouse in football in Division III, Mount Union kind of started its ascendancy to the top. So called a few Mount Union Muskingum games as well. But yeah, it was great to be able to add that to the repertoire of doing sports, not just high school, but also doing college.
And then fast forward to the turn of the century in the year 2000, obviously an opportunity coming about that, that changed your career, obviously, Doug, and changed your life. So take us back, to that time in 2000 when this opportunity came to move to Lewisburg and to have this opportunity to be the next voice of the Bucknell Bison.
Well, actually, I'll take you back to 1996 because it was about 1996 when I started doing advertising sales for AVC Communications. So up until that point, I was the news and sports director, but I kind of wanted to my minor it was in basically sales, and I wanted to try and be able to get into that aspect. Number one, you could make a lot more money with the sales, but then number two, I just felt like if I did sales, and this was kind of going back to college, my college days, I felt like if I did sales, that would make me a little bit more marketable to be able to hopefully latch on to a college or university because I could do the play by play, but I could also help sell advertising. So that was 1996. So I did that for a few years there with AVC and did really well, blessed to be able to do well in the sales aspect of things. And then 1999, my friend Randy Lee, who I'd mentioned before, at that time he was, I think, at Cal Santa Barbara. He would have been. Yeah, he was the play-by-play announcer at Cal Santa Barbara for basketball and stuff. And so he had heard that someone he was acquainted with, Bob Beeler, who is now at Boise State University, was going to be leaving Bucknell, where he had been for 13 years after he graduated from the University of Georgia, and he was going to be going to the University of Massachusetts. And he was leaving mid-season for football. So they had someone, Chris Carlin, who was his analyst, and Chris is huge in the New York City market now. So Chris has been on all the shows in New York City. He's the regular play-by-play announcer for Rutgers. So he stepped in for the remainder of that 99 football season for Bucknell. But that opened the door, beginning in basketball, for play by play. So Randy told me about it. And he said, you should apply. And I said, okay. I had never, hate to say it, I'm sure I had heard of Bucknell, but I didn't really know where it was. And yeah, I just didn't know. But I applied and didn't get it. So, just kept doing my job at AVC Communications. Well, then Todd Newcomb, who is still here at Bucknell, was hired to be able to, one of his duties, hire a new play-by-play announcer. The individual who was here had just graduated the year before from Syracuse, so he was fresh out of college. But what Todd wanted to do was he wanted someone who could not only handle play-by-play, but could sell advertising. So I remember Randy got in touch with me again. He goes, hey, that Bucknell job's open again. And he said, why don't you apply? And I go, Randy, I didn't get it the first time. Why waste my time? He said, no, you should apply. You never know. So I did. And he was right. Todd was the person who was hiring. And so I came up for an interview. I was one of three finalists, I guess. Came up for an interview and they offered me the job. And that was July of 2000 when I started here at Bucknell.
How did you sell yourself, Doug, when you went to Lewisburg for that interview in July 2000 that you believe, that Todd and his crew said, I think we want to hire him?
Well, I'm sure some of it, maybe not all, but some of it was the cassette tape I sit in with the audio samples. But I do believe the biggest thing was I had done a really good job. Again, very blessed to have been able to do that. Really done a very nice job in sales in my years, and they had exponentially grown from the beginning when I first got into sales. I'd never obviously sold anything prior to that time till that last year, 1999. And I think that that probably was what really sold Todd and the folks who I interviewed with here on campus during that summer of 2000 rather, and that may have been what did it.
And speaking now, Doug, in 2025, when you first stepped on campus in 2000, did you expect to spend the rest of your career at Bucknell when you stepped on campus in 2000?
Oddly enough, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it. I just hadn't necessarily looked down the road. I'd always prayed that be the voice of a college or university, and I didn't necessarily care where. I wasn't looking to try and go to a big university necessarily. I just wanted to be the voice of a college or university. So I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I kind of just every year, every day, every month, whatever, taking it one day at a time. And I honestly, looking back, I'm amazed that it's been over 25 years that I've been here in Lewisburg and at Bucknell. It just has gone by just like that. And so I can't say that I looked that far ahead. Um, but I always wanted to be the voice of a college, university, and this fit the bill as well as anywhere.
Yeah, and obviously, Doug, you have had a chance to call so many, phenomenal games in this century, that Bison fans obviously remember. What is that one game during your 25 years at Bucknell that really stands out? And then first, I was wondering if you could think of one for football and one for basketball.
I would say for football, probably a loss, oddly enough. Back in 2015, Bucknell played at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and Army was in its first year of Coach Munkin, who's still the head coach there and has done a terrific job with the Black Knights. But they didn't have a great team that year. I think they only won two games, one of them being Bucknell. But Bucknell was hanging in there, had the lead uh, in the last 2 minutes of the game by a point. And then Army, which of course, 2 minutes left, had to go length of the field, but they had a great 6'5" wide receiver. Obviously, Army's known for the wishbone or the spread option offense. So you were thinking they probably would be forced to pass, but they weren't necessarily great at passing the ball, particularly when they were forced into it. But they just heaved it down the field from their own 20-yard line down the near sideline. I can see it even today to that 6'5" receiver, Edgar Allan Poe. What a name. And he was able to catch it. Our defensive back, cornerback was on an island. The safety wasn't over there. And he was only about 5'8". So Poe was easily able to get it. And he took it 80 yards. And unfortunately, Bucknell was not able to get a touchdown. The Bison would have had to score a touchdown to win the game. But that was one of the more unique settings. And even though it was a loss, it was a great setting because Bucknell, up to that point, had never played an FBS team. Well, I take that back. Did play back in 2002, played at Kent State University, but the atmosphere at West Point was so much better than at Kent State. And so that was probably the biggest game football wise. Basketball, I've had quite a few. I mean, Bucknell, again, been so blessed. Bucknell's men's basketball program has really rocketed up since about 2005. In 2003-04, Bucknell had its first scholarship group. So it had four players, three of which were on scholarship. Up to that point, Bucknell had never had scholarship basketball players. Well, that group in 04-05 wins the Patriot League tournament on the road at Holy Cross. Crusaders had a great team that year and then went to the NCAA tournament after having beaten Pitt, which was ranked 10th in the country at the Peterson Event Center. It was the first non-league loss, that time ACC for Pitt, obviously still in the ACC, but non-league loss for Pitt at the Peterson Event Center in its history. That Peterson Event Center had been probably 10 years old at that time. So Pitt just did not lose home games to non-league opponents. And Bucknell beat them. They were ranked 10th in the country. That was in the regular season. Bucknell won at St. Joseph's. St. Joe's the year before had made it to the Elite Eight, had a great team, was undefeated till that game where they lost in the Elite Eight to, I think, Oklahoma State. So Bucknell had some great regular season wins that year. They ended up playing Kansas, team that was ranked number one in the country earlier in like December of that year. And Bucknell beat Kansas in the NCAA tournament. And that was Bucknell's first ever first ever NCAA win. It was the Patriot League's first ever NCAA tournament win. I mean, that has to go down as the greatest, but Bucknell has won at Purdue. Bucknell has won at Vanderbilt. Bucknell has played Villanova very tight games. Barely lost at Missouri. Bucknell has beaten Syracuse at the Dome. I mean, the list goes on and on. There have been some great games that Bucknell has participated in. I've had the blessing again to be able to call.
Do you have a favorite basketball arena, Doug, that you had the chance to broadcast out on the road? Just saying all of those names, and all those arenas that you have been able to broadcast at.
I like Vanderbilt. It's weird because you're sitting courtside, but you're at one corner. And of course, that's a raised floor. But it's just such an old, historic kind of building. But obviously, having called two games now at Duke's Cameron Indoor Stadium, that would have to rank up there. But Syracuse in the Dome, it's so unique. Also called a game at Northern Iowa. And at that time, Northern Iowa was playing in its football stadium, which is a dome. So they played their basketball games there. That was unique. Kentucky Rupp Arena, been able to call an NCAA tournament game there. And then this past season, Bucknell played there. I had a regular season game, and I had been at Rupp Arena a number of times prior because I would drive. It was only like 2 hours from Lexington to Huntington, West Virginia, across Interstate 64. So went to a number of Kentucky games just growing up. But Gonzaga this past year, great environment. Purdue, I mean, wow, there have been a ton. Pitt, when Bucknell won, that was a great atmosphere. I mean, I'm just looking up Minnesota, Bucknell has played there. Of course, Penn State over at the Bryce Jordan Center, Wake Forest, Cal out in California, Notre Dame. I mean, Bucknell has played at some pretty neat places, but I would guess just because of the history, either Memorial Gym at Vanderbilt or Duke's Cameron Indoor Stadium. I mean, that the history of those can't be beat. And of course, the Palestra. Bucknell has played a couple of games at the Palestra down in Philly, and talk about history. That's historical too. Just a different team you're playing. Bucknell has played LaSalle there, Penn there, but not played a big school like a Vanderbilt or Duke or whatever.
That's amazing, Doug. And you are known, for your broadcasting style, of getting so excited, which I love. And you also have a few key phrases, one for bingo for basketball, and also just spelling out words whenever a big play is going on. So can you take us through where the inspiration came from for bingo, and then spelling out words, during your broadcast?
Well, if you remember back in high school, the very first game that I can recall listening to was Frank Gardenia, who was a Marshall grad, calling Marshall football at Mississippi State. Well, later that year, I started listening to Frank calling Marshall basketball games on the radio. And he had a phrase whenever a big shot happened or whatever for a Marshall player, he would just go, "Yes, sir." Something simple like that. But at that point, I thought, I may need to think about getting a particular word or phrase or something like that. You had Dick Enberg, and he would say, "Oh my," or Marv Albert, "Yes, and it counts," or whatever, when he did New York Knicks games and on TV as well. So you had people that had kind of a word or phrase that they would associate with. And while I did follow Frank Gardenia, I also started liking the University of Tennessee, particularly football. In my senior year of high school, 1982, high school year, 82, 83. And Tennessee had a long time at that time, and he ended up being even longer there, great announcer by the name of John Ward. So for basketball, if there was a big shot made, he would just say, bottom. That was his phrase for basketball. I didn't really follow Tennessee basketball that closely on the radio because living so far away, they weren't on a clear channel station. It's not like what you could do now and listen on your computer or your phone over the internet because all the radio broadcasts are over the internet or on Sirius XM satellite. That time you had to pick up a radio and be able to pick up the games. And Tennessee wasn't on a clear channel station, but they were on a powerful station in Knoxville that at the right time you could listen to some of his calls. I remember buying a cassette tape of John Ward, and in football, he had some tremendous phrases. He would go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What did he do? He scored 6. Touchdown. And he had a lot of different phrases for football. So I'm going through my college years, and senior year, 1986-87, the NCAA instituted an all Division I and probably 2 and 3, I guess, at that time too. They instituted the 3-point shot. So it was at the top of the key, like it had been for many years. And so I thought, that's what I'll do. Whenever Marshall makes a 3-pointer, I'll say a particular word for it. But then I thought, what word would I use? And in high school, during our football at Huntington East, we were taught by our coaches that when you're on defense, if the ball is tipped, intercepted by one of our defensive backs, linebackers, whatever, or if we picked up the ball on a fumble and we have to switch to block because we now have possession, we're on the offense, to yell out bingo, to let everybody know we have possession now, turn and block. So I thought, that's the word I'll use. I'll use bingo. So back at AVC Communications, that was really the first time high school wise that I was able to use that phrase. But I used it a lot, used it for all the games, would not use it just for one team. I would use it for both teams. So there'd be a lot of bingos out there when both teams hit a 3, particularly if it were 2 local teams, Cambridge Meadowbrook, Cambridge Buckeye Trail, Cambridge John Glenn, if they were playing each other. So I remember probably a year or so into my tenure at AVC Communications, our owner, Grant Halfley, asked if I could come into his office. I said, sure. And he sat down. He goes, hey, loving what I'm hearing or whatever on broadcast. He goes, but I've heard you use a word. I go, bingo. And he goes, yeah. He said, yeah, I don't really want you to use that word anymore. I just think that'd be better to not use it. And I said, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Halfley, but that's my signature. That's what I'm going to be using. And I'd be happy to resign, but I'm not going to give that up. And so he kind of relented. And I remember when I left in 1989, they had a party or whatever. And he said, or in 2000, excuse me. And he said that he goes, you know what? I'm glad that you didn't give up that bingo because when we go back to Ohio now, because my wife's from Ohio, that's what I'm known for is bingo. So that started that. But then that Pitt game back in the 04-05 season, I don't know why I did it. Just happened. Bucknell got a layup by one of the players, probably Charles Lee, who's the or the head coach for the Charlotte Hornets now in the NBA. But somebody got a layup, got fouled, and I just said, got it good, and he was Fouled. That spells fouled out, and I just did it. I don't know why, just kind of came out, and from that point on, I started using that. But yeah, I just picked up different phrases as the years go by, and some of them stuck, some of them haven't stuck, haven't been able to stick. But yeah, that's kind of like the genesis of a lot of that.
Yeah, and Doug, you were just talking about, Charles Lee, who of course is now the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. So what has that been like for you, the seeing former Bison athletes, that have had the chance, to go on to careers, in sports as a player and as a coach like Lee, and then also possibly maybe other careers, outside of the sports industry, that we might not know about?
It's been great. Probably the very first was Brian Bailey. Brian is an assistant coach in the NBA now. He was with Utah, but I believe he moved and he's with a different team now. Obviously, Charles Lee was an assistant head coach or assistant coach for a long time, became an associate head coach for a number of years with Budenholzer at Milwaukee. They won an NBA title there. And then with the Celtics, they won an NBA title there last year, 2 years ago, however you want to look at it. And then, of course, became the head coach with the Hornets. But we have Ryan Frazier, who played basketball at Bucknell, he's an assistant coach. He's with the Hornets as well. Nana Fallon, DJ McClay. DJ has now moved up to the front row once Lee left to take the head coach's job at Charlotte. McClay is now one of the front row coaches with the Celtics. He had a couple of huge shots in the win at Vanderbilt a number of years ago. But also Mike Muscala. Mike was Bucknell's first NBA player, graduated in 2013, spent 11 years in the NBA. 2 years ago, again, however you want to look at it, was his last year in the NBA. But it was great being able to see these guys. How some of them went on to play in Europe, play really well, like John Griffin, the current head coach. He played in Europe for a number of years. Nate Sestina, after he finished his 4 years basically at Bucknell, one of his years he couldn't play more than a couple of games because he had hurt his shoulder. So he had an extra year of eligibility. He finished his last year at Kentucky. So it was really neat seeing him in that bigger stage. But it's really interesting to be able to see guys, whether they go on to play or in many instances go on to coach in the NBA. There's definitely a pipeline of former Bucknell players in the highest ranks as coach, and you can't beat that.
Yeah, definitely, Doug. Then switching gears a little bit, how has your role as a sports broadcaster changed, over the course of your time at Bucknell? Obviously with this new day and age, of digital media and streaming platforms really taking over, because obviously you and I know, with all Bison games, really having the chance to appear on ESPN and also the Bison YouTube channel as well.
Exactly. So at the very beginning, back in 2000, everything was on radio. Didn't really have much video at all. Might have a couple of games here and there on TV. I remember the Patriot League had a basketball package on DirecTV. It was just on one of the channels on DirecTV. It was, that the game would be on, the game would be off, and that channel would be blank. Just one of the open channels that DirecTV had. But as the years moved on, when I first got the job, of course, for the first 5 or 6 years, I sold advertising as well as doing the play-by-play. Then we ended up doing a deal with a company called Nelligan Sports Marketing in SM, and they took over the advertising. So that meant that my role would change, and I started kind of overseeing our video component. Now, at that time, the Patriot League was just starting to get in with kind of the predecessor of ESPN Plus, and so they were able to get a deal, league-wide deal, with this online company. So we did some things with a company called Sports Shoes. That was just a one-camera shoot with our audio in a laptop, and we were able to send that across to anyone who could get it. At that time, high-speed internet was not a thing, so you had probably a lot of buffering and all that, but the games were quasi on video. But then the Patriot League got a deal with a company, and then here, probably about 4 years ago, signed a deal with ESPN Plus. And now every college, really, Division I, II, III, NAIA, whatever, they all have some component of video. So I oversaw the production companies, and those became so much bigger, so much more breadth to them. And we started doing more games than just, say, men's basketball at home or football at home. We could do away, of course, but we would pick up some soccer, pick up some field hockey, pick up some lacrosse. And so it just kind of expanded. So I did that for a number of years, about 10 years or so. And then here most recently, kind of doing behind the scenes more video. So I oversee announcers here at Bucknell, you being one of those, hire those people, work with those individuals. But then also I put together video packages, highlight packages. That was one thing that we really didn't have that a lot of Patriot League schools did have. And that was that we would have somebody go out, shoot some video highlights, and then talk, if it was a win, talk to the coach and a player after that and put those highlights up on our YouTube page, Bucknell YouTube page, or on Sidearm, the BucknellBison.com webpage. So, things have changed in the 25 plus years, and that's kind of what I'm guessing for the next few years things are going to be. I'll be doing a lot of the video behind the scenes and still overseeing the announcers for the ESPN Plus broadcasts, other than football and men's basketball, which I kind of handle those.
Yeah, and Doug, if you have thought about it, What do you think are going to be the main differences, with the future of how people consume sports, and watching sports like Bucknell Athletics?
Well, I think that it's definitely going to continue to have that video element. I think that the ESPN Pluses of the world, Flow Sports, there may be a few others out there, but those are the two biggest ones right now. I think that colleges all around are going to continue to have that. I just think that the parents are expecting it. The recruits are expecting it. I don't foresee that changing anytime in the near future. So I think you'll still see that. Now, of course, you can watch the games on your phone or whatever the case may be. But I think that that's probably going to continue. I don't know that there's going to be much else by way of change. I think it's still going to be over the internet. I don't know that anything's going to open up for schools our size on the television realm, other than a package that, say, the Patriot League may do, like with CBS Sports or whatever. So I think, just from my crystal ball down the road, I think that's kind of what I see.
Yeah, definitely, Doug. And what advice do you have, Doug, for anybody who is interested in joining us, and wanting to spend their career in the sports industry?
Well, of course, I went to college. I don't know necessarily you have to go to college, but for me, it worked great. I was able to get a lot of experience at the college radio station. And, we took it very seriously. Had a professor by the name of Charles Bailey, he's still there, actually. And he was a stickler to do things the right way. And I think that that's exactly what we did. We had fun, but we didn't play around. We weren't playing radio. This was something to prepare us for the real world, if you will. And literally, at that time, it kind of started under Dr. Bailey's guidance, but it really has ramped up for the last 30 plus years under his guidance, where they win awards against commercial radio stations. So this is a college station, and WMUL FM is as good as any commercial radio station in news, sports, promos, internet, bunch of stuff. And so I think that that really was my route. I don't know necessarily have to. I know they have the excuse me, Dan Patrick School of Broadcasting. There are other schools of broadcasting out there. I think those are fine. I'm a member. I believe you are a member as well of the Sportscasters Talent Agency of America, and I think that that's a good way if you can get involved in that, and you can find out job openings. It's kind of like the more modern day version of Broadcast Magazine that I had spoken about way back when. And so I think that that really helps. The biggest thing is to get reps, and that's not always easy. But in some ways, maybe it's become more on the easy side because you have so many, even high schools are wanting to carry their games on video. So, just to get reps, work at a local radio station or a local video and just ask if you can get involved. And you may have to get involved video wise, like as a camera operator or as an audio person or doing something like directing or something. But it may open the door to where, if that's what you want to broadcasting. So, there are a lot of ways to be able to do it. But I think the most important thing is to get reps wherever you are, whatever you're doing. That's the most important thing. Get involved with someone. You were great reaching out to us, and be persistent. If you're persistent, a lot of times that works out for you in your favor. So I think that kind of all of that wrapped into one, that's kind of the way I would look at how to enter the business and continue to keep it going.
And finally, for you, Doug, what has been your favorite memory as a whole during your career in the sports industry?
The biggest thing is, and when I entered back in college, I remember praying about this. Actually, I'm very, very strong in my faith. And I remember saying, God, I just want to be able to help others. I didn't want to get into it for any recognition, didn't want to get into it for any kind of big name. Like I said, I wasn't necessarily wanting to be on. ESPN was kind of starting to come into its own in the early and mid 80s, but it wasn't what it is now. CBS, those seemed like pie in the sky because there were only three networks at the time carrying everything. Um, my goal was I want to try and help other people to get into the business because I had heard that it was going to be very difficult. And so I think that that was probably the biggest thing. And I think through the years, been blessed to be able to hopefully help other individuals to get involved. But the biggest thing is just to be now here at Bucknell, 25 plus years, just to be able to be part of a team. It was great calling high school football, whether it was Fort Gay, whether it was Vincent, Crum, whatever, back in West Virginia, or in Ohio, Cambridge High School, Meadowbrook, John Glenn, Caldwell, Shenandoah, Buckeye Trail, Bartonsville, whatever. Those were great. Muskingum was great, but I wasn't really part of the team. I would just do the games, and we would obviously go separate of the teams and so forth. So I didn't really get to know them. But now here at Bucknell, I literally feel as if I'm part of the team, travel with the men's basketball team. I don't travel a ton with football, but get to know them off the field and stuff. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is the relationships that you gain from being able to be the play-by-play person at a school. And that was another big aspect that I really wanted to be involved in when I got into this crazy business of sports broadcasting.
Well, Doug, I know speaking for myself, you have been somebody that has helped me, throughout my career, being a part of Bucknell over the past few years. And yeah, and Doug, you are definitely, one of those true people that I will always remember for just being so kind and for helping me break in, and for me being a part of the Bison family. That's why I'm so honored to have you on as my first guest for Voices in the Game because of the amount of effort that you have done out of your way to help me, as I navigate through the start of my career. And again, I can't thank you enough, my friend.
Happy to do it. And, I think people should be able to look at your background too, because, way back when I was talking about this, tenacity, perseverance, you exemplify that. And so I think that if you want to be in this business, you drive from the western side of the state all the way to central PA to be able to do as many games here at Bucknell as possible. And I know you do stuff out in the western side and West Virginia as well. But to be able to do that, you have to have that inner drive, that inner desire, and you have it. And I think people need to learn about your story as well, Colton.
Oh, I can't thank you so much, my friend. It means so much for me, Doug. It really does. It means so much to me, Doug. So that will wrap things up here for our first episode of Voices in the Game. We want to thank you all so much for joining us. And if you would like your story to be told, please send me an email or please reach out to me on all of my social media platforms. I will be putting a link in, in this video, to my email. So if you would like your story to be featured for anybody listening who has that desire to join us in the sports industry, please reach out. We would love to feature you. And Doug, thank you so much again for being my first guest here. It really was an honor to have you on, my friend.
Thank you very much, Colton. And I know you're going to have a great career ahead of you.